he keeps, now since February, talking up an invasion of Rafah, there are no preparation sites. That kind of an operation would require weeks of preparation by the Israeli army. It would require an amassing of troops. It would require armaments. It requires a lot of planning. Plus, we're talking about more than 1 million people in Rafah who the Israelis have assured the United States will be housed, if they're forced out of Rafah. None of that is in place. So I think we have to assume for now, whether Netanyahu is listening to other leaders or not, that his armies are not in place to engage in that way.
Good evening. Well, this time last week, we were waiting, as cruise missiles and drones made their way through the skies of Iraq, Jordan and Syria. Iranian missiles on their way to Israel. And then we braced for the response, didn't we? And on Friday, yesterday, Israel aimed at Iranian military targets. And with that, it seems the dust has somewhat settled and attention now returning to Gaza. G7 leaders have warned the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to launch a full-scale military operation in Rafah, the city in southern Gaza that's currently hosting hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians. It's been reported tonight that an Israeli airstrike on a house in Rafah has killed at least 10 people, including 6 children. I want to speak to Noga Tarnopolsky, who's an Israeli journalist and is currently in New York. Noga, we'll come to the situation in Rafah in a moment. Let's just start with this premise. I mean, is it right to assume, as many are, commentators tonight, that these tensions between Israel and Iran may have now reached their peak?
Look, that's clearly the hope, and that is what Israeli Western allies have been pushing for. And Iran is giving many indications that it is not looking for a greater escalation. But it's important to remember in this context that the attack from Iran was obviously a major attack, 350 cruise missiles, drones, etc. And also that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, all of these militias, Islamist militias fighting Israel, are all funded and armed by and trained by Iran. So we're hoping to see another escalation of actual bombing between the two countries, but the conflict continues.
Okay. Let's return our attention to Gaza then, Noga, where, G7 leaders this weekend saying to Benjamin Netanyahu directly, do not launch a full-scale military operation in Rafah. It is just too risky at the moment. Is Netanyahu listening?
I don't know if he's listening. It's unclear to me that he's listening to much of anyone right now, but it's important to note that while he keeps, now since February, talking up an invasion of Rafah, there are no preparation sites. That kind of an operation would require weeks of preparation by the Israeli army. It would require an amassing of troops. It would require armaments. It requires a lot of planning. Plus, we're talking about more than 1 million people in Rafah who the Israelis have assured the United States will be housed, if they're forced out of Rafah. None of that is in place. So I think we have to assume for now, whether Netanyahu is listening to other leaders or not, that his armies are not in place to engage in that way.
Okay. Were that to happen, Noga, what would a invasion of Rafah look like?
Well, right now, if it were to happen, it would look very bad, again, because Rafah is full of internally displaced Gazans from the north, plus its own native population. So as far as what we know about Israeli assurances to the United States, the first several weeks ahead of such an invasion would involve moving about 1 million people out of Rafah into some sort of alternate housing in central or north Gaza. We know that Israel presented the White House with a plan involving like 10 cities, and the White House absolutely rejected it and said the Israelis was completely inadequate. So it would have to start with that, and we don't yet know what Israel might present as a possible alternative.
Right. And just help us with the context around hostages and Hamas. I mean, how many hostages and what sort of Hamas infrastructure is there in Rafah that Israel would be wanting to target?
I think there are two things. Partly it's physical infrastructure, it's tunnels, and it's military headquarters that house, what the Israelis describe as two Hamas brigades. These are not exactly like brigades, in the British Army. They're militias brigades, but they're dangerous. There are a lot of armaments. There are a lot of missile and rocket launchers. Plus, there's like in Gaza City, a massive network of underground tunnels, possibly even bigger, because from Rafah, some of those tunnels reach into Egypt, and they've been used for smuggling everything from luxury cars to armaments. The other thing Israelis are looking for are Hamas leaders that Israel believes have taken refuge among the other internally displaced Palestinians in southern Gaza.
And just outline finally, Noga, the other side of that coin, I suppose, which is or perhaps the same coin, I guess, which is the humanitarian picture in Rafah at the moment. We've been hearing some really alarming testimony, haven't we, out of Rafah?
Yes, we've been hearing alarming testimony of Rafah and out of the rest of Gaza, where there still is, a major population, more than 2 million people. Ironically, the situation in terms of aid, food, and water coming in has improved since this disastrous Israeli strike that killed 6 aid workers for the World Central Kitchen. As a result of that, the United States really forced Netanyahu's hand, and since then the Israeli government has enabled hundreds and hundreds of trucks, I think one day even more than 1,000, carrying food and water to enter Gaza from numerous crossings. So that situation appears to be improving, but, improving from a very, very terrible base.
Okay. Noga, thank you for your time tonight. Always appreciate it. Noga Tarnopolsky.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who is an Israeli journalist currently in New York for us tonight. We're returning to the Middle East soon. We'll come back to this story tomorrow. I think it's really worth us diving deeper into what a invasion or otherwise of Rafah, an operation or otherwise of Rafah, would look like, how it would work, which bits of it are necessary and which bits aren't, and all of the logistics and the ins and the outs of it. So we'll get into that tomorrow night.